I am Valerie Quinn, 38 years old and a senior logistics coordinator from Milwaukee. The irony of being called the backbone of the team for over a decade didn't escape me, especially not on the day they fired me over a Zoom call, citing budget realignment. I gave them 16 years, trained their managers, ran their systems, cleaned up their messes, and yet they discarded me without warning. That betrayal cracked something deep inside. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe if you value standing up for yourself. They didn't even have the decency to call me into the office. After 16 years, I got a calendar invite marked Restructuring Overview. I knew the moment I saw it. The title was corporate speak for, "We're about to ruin your life with a smile." I wore a blazer anyway. Not because I needed to impress anyone over Zoom, but because I needed to hold on to something. Some illusion of control, some thread of dignity. The moment the call connected, I saw Mona from HR in the top left square and Darren, my division head, looking stiff in his office chair. "Valerie," Darren started, his voice thin like paper. "We appreciate everything you've done for Evercore Logistics. Truly." He paused as if waiting for me to cry, protest, or plead. I didn't. I sat there, still, composed, watching the man who used to call me the engine that keeps the machine running fumble through his lines like he was reading from a script. "This wasn't an easy decision," he added, gesturing toward the spreadsheet behind him like the data itself had sentenced me. Mona jumped in, trying to soften the blow with HR nonsense. "This isn't performance-related. It's purely structural. Your role was made redundant during the recent operational pivot." Redundant. That word stung more than fired. "I built the operational pivot," I said. Mona blinked. "I trained half your team, wrote the manuals, negotiated the vendor resets. That pivot wouldn't exist without me." Darren sighed. "We know." "That's what made this so difficult." No, it didn't. What made it difficult was that someone younger, cheaper, was waiting to step into my position. Probably already logged into my dashboards. I logged out of the meeting in silence. My hands trembled as I shut the laptop. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the fridge and the violent rhythm of my own heartbeat. I didn't cry. Not yet. I made myself tea. I wouldn't drink and stared at the kitchen tiles until the sun shifted through the blinds and the walls turned golden. That evening, I told my younger sister Claire, "They fired you," she gasped. "But you're their top performer." "Was," I corrected. "What about all the weekends you worked? The supply crisis you handled last year? All irrelevant now." She was angrier than I was. "You need to sue them," I shook my head. "No, not yet. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal. I cleaned the apartment, organized my bookshelf, replied to emails pretending they still mattered. But underneath it all, I was unraveling. They hadn't just fired me. They'd rewritten the narrative. They turned my years of loyalty into something disposable, erased. And as I scrolled through LinkedIn and saw Darren's post about Evercore's bold new future, I realized something deeper. They were already celebrating, toasting to the cost cuts, maybe even to my absence. That was the first night I didn't sleep. A week later, the company-issued laptop still sat in the hallway. I couldn't bring myself to return it yet. It felt like a gravestone. I opened it, not out of nostalgia, but curiosity. Revenge wasn't yet a word in my head, but there was something electric in my fingertips as I typed in the password and opened the internal folders I'd once built. Years of archived emails, vendor records, shift reports, and digital receipts stared back at me. I saw everything, the gray areas I had once ignored. The mistakes Darren covered up. The numbers that never quite added up. The safety report I filed that mysteriously disappeared, the transport manifest. I signed under duress, knowing the weight limits had been falsified to meet a deadline. All those times I was told, "Just trust us, Valerie. It'll get handled," and I had, like a good soldier, like a loyal fool. But now the fog was lifting. It started with a list. I wrote down every irregularity I remembered. Every shady instruction, every compliance violation I'd swallowed over the years to protect my team and their image. Then I dug deeper. Emails, PDFs, Slack threads, digital fingerprints everywhere. I had been their vault for years. But now the lock had turned inward. 2 weeks after I was fired, my phone rang. It was Lisa, a floor supervisor I had trained back in 2017. Val, is it true? Is what true? That you're gone? I exhaled slowly. Yes, Jesus. They didn't even tell us. I found out through the grapevine. I figured. They've got some guy named Kyle taking over. He already changed the shipment routes and doubled the night shifts. The staff's exhausted and, well, some of us were hoping you'd open your own thing. I didn't respond. Or at least, fight back. She added softly. That night, I couldn't sleep again. But it wasn't anxiety keeping me awake this time. It was something sharper. Something alive. Revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with clarity. You sit with the pain long enough, and eventually, you see through it. You stop begging the people who betrayed you to explain themselves, and start preparing the world to watch them burn. They wanted me gone quietly, but they forgot the most important thing. I was the one who built the house, and now I knew exactly which beam to pull to bring the whole thing down. If I had been paying closer attention, I might have seen it coming. The signs were always there. Whispers in hallways, budget meetings that didn't quite add up, and Darren suddenly becoming more interested in optics than actual operations. I'd chalked it up to the usual corporate shift. After all, we'd gone through 3 different CEOs in the last 6 years. Each one promised transformation, innovation, and synergy. What they really meant was cut costs, inflate the brand, and spin the numbers. And for years, I played along. Not because I was naive, but because I genuinely believed I could hold it all together. I believed if I worked harder, shielded my team, and kept the warehouse running at near military precision, someone at the top would eventually notice and reward the effort. But I was wrong. I remembered a conversation from 6 months before they let me go. Darren had called me into his glass office just before lunch. He'd lowered his voice like we were planning a heist. We're shifting contracts for the interstate hauls, he said, going with a third-party courier to cut costs. They're not union, I pointed out. He smiled, as if I had passed a test. Exactly. Lower rates, fewer strings. You get it. I didn't get it. Not really, but the safety ratings, they're adequate. Don't worry, Valerie. We'll fudge the paperwork. Just need you to reissue the compliance slips under our vendor license. My stomach turned. That's not legal. He leaned back and looked at me like I was the last idealist on earth. This is how it works now. I said no that day. I reminded him of liability, protocol, and federal transportation guidelines. He didn't argue. Just nodded slowly and said, "All right, I'll get someone else to handle it." And he did. That same week, a junior manager named Kyle started shadowing me. Fresh MBA, fancy shoes, 0 field experience. I was told to loop him in and show him the ropes. I knew what that meant. I was training my replacement and pretending not to notice. The rot wasn't just in Darren. It had seeped into the walls of Evercore long before he arrived. The company used to be solid. I joined when I was 22, fresh out of a 2-year logistics program, eager and willing to do anything. Back then, we were lean but ethical. The founder, Mr. Ellison, ran the company like a family bakery. You worked hard, you earned your place. Everyone's name mattered. When he retired and sold to a private equity firm, everything changed. Suddenly, our quarterly meetings weren't about improving systems. They were about brand perception and investor confidence. The trucks got newer, the software got flashier, but the people, the warehouse staff, the drivers, the dispatch team were overworked and forgotten. I became the bridge. The fixer, the one who translated corporate nonsense into daily operations. I kept people calm during benefit rollbacks. I soothed union reps when their hours were cut. I sat through budget meetings where Darren nodded along while secretly reallocating funds behind closed doors. Once, I caught a discrepancy in the payroll report. It showed overtime hours being adjusted post-payroll submission. I flagged it to finance 2 days later. I was told not to concern myself with back-end protocols outside my scope. That's when I started keeping copies. I didn't know why at the time, just a quiet instinct. Like laying breadcrumbs in a forest I knew I'd someday have to escape from. There was one moment that haunted me more than any other. It was a Tuesday night. I had stayed late to audit shipment logs. Something wasn't lining up with the delivery timestamps. I found a pattern. Trucks were being marked as on-site at delivery locations hours before they physically arrived. That meant logs were being manipulated. I confronted Kyle the next morning. "Just time zone glitches?" he shrugged, sipping his green smoothie. "No, Kyle. This is deliberate backdating." He gave me that smug smile, the one he wore whenever he thought he was impressing someone. "Look, Darren said to keep the numbers clean. That's what I'm doing. And if one of those trucks crashes while falsified data is logged, then it's your problem," he said casually, "since your name is on the dispatch reports." I felt the floor shift beneath me. That night, I emailed Darren. I told him I would not be complicit in falsifying documents, and if forced, I'd escalate to the Department of Transportation. He never replied. But 3 weeks later, I was restructured out. Looking back, the whole setup was surgical. They didn't fire me during my peak season. They waited until I'd streamlined the new delivery algorithm, wrapped up the vendor renewal cycle, and trained Kyle in my workflows. Then they cut me loose. No one would question it. No one would care. Except they made one mistake. They underestimated what a woman like me, quiet, methodical, and dangerously well-informed, could do when betrayed. The rot ran deep. But I knew where the roots were. There were backdoor deals with freight auditors, unexplained inventory write-offs, and tampered maintenance logs. I remembered a driver, Samir, who once came to me in tears because his accident wasn't reported properly. They'd told him to keep quiet, promised he'd still get his hours, but then his hours dried up. His contract was dropped, and I said nothing. I was too afraid to lose my job, too afraid to burn bridges. But that fear was gone now. Burning bridges wasn't just an option anymore. It was a necessity. I began organizing everything, not just the evidence, but the story. I outlined a timeline, linked each suspicious document to a date, a decision, a directive. I contacted 2 former employees, both of whom had been quietly pushed out after raising red flags. One of them, Naomi, used to head compliance. She told me flat out, "Valerie, they're dirty. I tried to blow the whistle in 2020. They crushed me. You need a real plan." I did, and I wasn't going to run to the press or file a blind lawsuit. No, that wasn't enough. This wasn't just about making noise. This was about making sure they could never do it. Again, I researched investigative journalism, networks, whistleblowerprotections.corporate, accountability forums, and slowly, I built my arsenal, not of weapons, but of truth. Because when the rot goes deep enough, it doesn't take fire to bring the house down, it just takes light. The day after they fired me, the world didn't stop. That's what shocked me most. The streets outside still buzzed. The cafe downstairs still served burnt espresso. Dogs barked. Kids screamed. Life continued like my life hadn't just been disassembled piece by piece. But inside my apartment, it was quiet, too quiet. No urgent Slack messages, no 6:30 a.m. delivery updates, no spreadsheets loaded with red highlighted action items. It felt like a death, but one nobody was mourning, except me. I woke up on autopilot that first morning, even showered and dressed in work clothes before catching myself in the hallway mirror. I looked like a ghost, washed out, hollow-eyed, ridiculous in a navy blazer with nowhere to go. I poured coffee. I stared at it for 20 minutes. Then I poured it down the sink. That was the first day of my silence. I didn't tell many people what happened. Not yet. There's a kind of shame that attaches itself to being discarded. Even when you know you did nothing wrong, the silence becomes armor. You convince yourself you're handling it until the hours stretch long and shapeless, and your thoughts begin to echo off the walls. I cleaned obsessively. I wiped baseboards, organized Tupperware by size, rearranged my bookshelves by genre, then by author, then by color. Each task was a substitute for control. Each drawer I closed perfectly gave me a sense of order I no longer felt inside myself. But every night, I'd sit in the dark, staring at that closed laptop, feeling like something inside me had been unstitched. And the worst part? They weren't even thinking about me. A week passed. Then 2. And somewhere in that emptiness, I began to hear things I'd been too busy to notice before. My own voice, my anger, my clarity. I remembered all the moments I had brushed off as just how it is. Being asked to rewrite quarterly, summaries to make losses look less sharp. Watching warehouse employees get denied hazard bonuses while executives took retreats in Aspen. The time I overheard Darren laughing about how Valerie would stay until the ship sank. Bless her. I hadn't just been loyal. I'd been useful. And now, stripped of that usefulness, I was expendable. It was late on a Thursday when the first real thought of revenge crept in. I was going through an old hard drive, backing up personal files, when I came across a folder marked Triage. It was from the 2022 vendor crisis, one of the worst quarters in company history. I'd pulled multiple 14-hour shifts to salvage things after Darren mishandled the contract renewal cycle. Inside the folder were drafts, emails, statements, vendor letters, audit notes, including one damning spreadsheet, a side-by-side comparison of Darren's inflated projections versus the actual numbers I pulled from our software logs. Back then, I had drafted it for transparency. He never used it. He buried it, pretended it didn't exist. But I kept a copy. The silence began to shift. It wasn't stillness anymore. It was incubation. I wasn't crumbling. I was cocooning. And when the quiet was deep enough, the memories came sharper. I remembered the way Lisa had cried in the break room after her maternity leave was denied. How Darren had laughed it off, saying, "This isn't a daycare." I remembered Marco, our night shift lead, being injured during a late warehouse scramble. I filed an incident report. It never resurfaced. He left 3 months later. I remembered Naomi's quiet exit. How nobody was told why the compliance officer just disappeared. Now I knew. I started calling people. Not many. Just the ones I trusted. Lisa, Naomi, Marco. Even a vendor I'd worked with for 6 years, who always warned me to watch my back with those corporate wolves. Each conversation was a match struck in the dark. Everyone had a story, most had receipts. They just never believed anyone would care enough to connect the dots. But I did, because now in the silence, I had nothing but time to connect the dots. And once I started, a picture emerged. A picture so grotesque and deliberate it made my stomach turn. They weren't just unethical, they were dangerous. I reached out to Naomi again. "Are you willing to go on record?" There was a pause. "Are you?" "Yes," I said. "Now I am. Then I will too." We talked for hours, pieced together the real story behind Evercore's polished facade. We started compiling a dossier. Every document, every redacted report, every falsified log. We didn't just want to prove wrongdoing. We wanted to paint a full narrative, one that would be undeniable when exposed. Meanwhile, I still received LinkedIn updates from Evercore. They had posted a video celebrating their People First initiative. Darren appeared in a blazer with rolled sleeves, walking through a brightly lit warehouse, shaking hands like a politician. His voice echoed from my screen. "At Evercore, we believe in integrity, transparency, and the power of our people." I laughed so hard I nearly choked, because I remembered him once saying behind closed doors, "Employees are like toothpaste. You squeeze everything out before you throw away the tube." The next day, I reached out to a journalist. Her name was Dina Rahman. She'd written an exposé last year on labor violations in a major textile firm. Her reporting had led to federal investigations and the CEO's resignation. I sent her a polite, anonymous email. Subject, story lead, logistics giant engaged in systemic fraud and cover-ups. Within 24 hours, she replied. We arranged a call. I didn't use my real name at first. I referred to myself as Redline. But Dina had this calming presence, like a surgeon who's seen every kind of wound and knows exactly how to treat it. After 3 conversations, I told her everything: real name, role, timeline, documents. She listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush. Then she said, "This is huge. If what you're saying is backed by documentation, This could be one of the biggest accountability stories in the corporate sector this year. I have it all, I said, and I did. Every receipt, every lie, every data trail they thought I'd deleted. In the silence after the storm, I found something I never expected. Power. Not the kind that comes with titles or big paychecks. The kind that comes from truth. From the clarity of being so deeply wronged that fear no longer has a place in your body. They fired me, thinking I'd disappear. Instead, I became the very thing they feared most, a woman with a voice and nothing left to lose. If silence was my cocoon, then truth was the match, and I was ready to strike it. After my third call with Dina, the investigative journalist, I realized this wasn't just going to be a story in a column. It had the potential to explode into a full-scale takedown, but only if I treated it like the operation it needed to be: strategic, airtight, and utterly untraceable. I wasn't just going to expose Evercore, I was going to burn them to the ground. One paper trail at a time. The first step was building credibility. Dina had warned me. One weak point and they'll shred your story. So I laid it out like a legal brief. Time-stamped emails, unaltered server logs, payroll discrepancies, internal Slack messages I'd screen captured over the years, even phone recordings. Not everything was explosive, but the pattern it painted. Devastating. Naomi sent her own cash, so did Lisa, so did Marco. We were no longer just former employees. We were whistleblowers with synchronized narratives. Then came the emotional risk. I decided to go public. No more pseudonym. No more red line. I sent Dina a selfie, just me. No makeup, no filters. Just truth in a face that had once smiled through boardroom betrayals. She didn't say much in response. But the next day, I got a call from her editor. He simply said, "We want to feature your story as a 2-part special." That's when I knew it was real. With Dina's help, I drafted my own written testimony. We tightened the story into a timeline, cross-referenced every name, every date. I even fact-checked the coffee order from the day I overheard Darren mock Lisa's miscarriage. Hazelnut latte. No foam, February 18th, 3:47 p.m. I still had the receipt from the company cafe. Because I had paid for it, Lisa had left crying. Every small truth mattered now. But justice, I realized, isn't just about exposure, it's about impact. Evercore could deny a news story. They couldn't deny federal subpoenas. So I went to the Department of Labor, Naomi, Marco, and I submitted a joint grievance. Violation lists spanned 8 pages. Overtime, denial, safety, negligence, falsified. Incident reports, retaliatory, terminations, fraudulent vendor contracts. I also contacted the National Whistleblower Center. They assigned us a legal liaison within a week. The wheels were turning, and I made sure Evercore wouldn't hear a thing until the gears crushed them, but the fuse didn't. Just burn on paper. It had to burn inside the company. 2. That's where Ashley came in. Ashley was a current employee, one of the only ones I still trusted. A single mom working 60-hour weeks in HR compliance. She'd once sent me flowers when I was sick, even though company policy said not to fraternize beyond the chain of command. I called her on Signal, encrypted. "Ash," I whispered. "I'm going after them." All the way, silence. Then, "Good, I've got things too." I held my breath. "Things?" She said, "Backdated reports. Safety logs Darren altered. I didn't delete them, I saved them, I just didn't know if anyone would ever care." "Oh, I care now," I said. Ashley sent over a hidden zip folder. Inside was the final nail, a document where Darren had manually altered warehouse injury stats before an OSHA review. Not a mistake. Not a clerical error, an intentional digital cover-up. I remember staring at the screen for a long time. Then I called Dina and said, "We've got him. This is the one." In the meantime, Evercore's LinkedIn feed was a parade of denial. Darren had posted a photo of the executive team at a charity golf tournament, leading with heart and hustle. The caption read, I stared at that image of them, smiling in pastel polos, holding beers, hands on each other's shoulders. And I thought of Marco's torn rotator cuff, of Lisa's unpaid maternity leave, of Naomi's gag order, and I smiled for the first time in weeks because their collapse was already in motion. They just didn't know it yet. Then came the hardest part, waiting. Dina's article went through fact-checking, legal review, multiple editorial rewrites. The labor complaint took time to process. The whistleblower paperwork was a mountain of red tape. But under the surface, the fuse kept burning. Then, one Monday morning, it happened. The article dropped. Front page of the digital edition. Title, Inside the Warehouse, How Evercore Sacrificed Its Workers for Profit. The subheading. A former employee speaks out and brings the receipts. And right below it, a photo of me. The fallout was immediate. Emails, messages. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Some were angry. Why'd you do this to the company? But most were grateful. Thank you for saying what we couldn't. Former employees, vendors, even clients. It spread like wildfire on Reddit. Workers from other logistics companies chimed in. Hashtags formed. The story trended for 2 days. Evercore released a statement. We are deeply concerned and take these allegations seriously. I laughed when I read it, especially since, according to Ashley, the executive team had a crisis meeting the night before, and Darren looked like he hadn't slept in days. By Wednesday, OSHA had opened an investigation. By Friday, Evercore's largest client, Trident Supply Chain Solutions, froze their contract pending legal review, and by Monday, Darren was gone, fired. Internal memo leaked and posted to a workers' subreddit. Effective immediately, Darren Klein has stepped down to pursue new opportunities. A photo surfaced, him exiting the building with a cardboard box. I printed it, framed it, put it above my desk. Poetic? Maybe, but cathartic? Absolutely. It didn't end there. More lawsuits followed. Class action suits from injured workers. Back pay claims. Shareholder inquiries. And all through it, I remained steady. Public, clear, unapologetic. They tried to discredit me, hired a PR firm, dug into my history, but I had nothing to hide. Every fact was solid, every file time-stamped. I was no longer just a woman who'd been fired. I was a movement. Late one evening, Naomi called me. Her voice shook. They called me today, she said. The new HR director offered me my job back. Said they're trying to clean up. Are you going back? There was a pause. No, she said, but it was nice to hear. We stayed on the phone for a while. Didn't say much, just breathed together in the new silence. This one wasn't empty. It was peaceful, earned. I looked at myself in the mirror that night. Same face, same tired eyes, but something was different now. Not broken, not expendable, just free. And for the first time since they fired me, I felt whole again. There's a strange silence that follows a public storm, not the calm kind, but the kind that carries tension, like air too still before lightning strikes again. That's what the week after the article felt like. Every day, I received messages from strangers. Some were warehouse workers thanking me. Others were anonymous emails, people still inside Evercore. Some came with attachments, documents, videos, whispers typed in courier font. It was like I had become a human filing cabinet for the forgotten. Naomi and I started meeting weekly. Not to plan anything, just to talk. We'd sit on my porch with mugs of black coffee, our knees touching as we scrolled through new messages. Look at this one, she said, holding up her phone. The screen showed a photo of exposed wires dangling above a packing line. Last year, the message said. No electrician. They just taped it up and told us not to lean too far. I exhaled sharply, and they still ran the floor. Of course they did, Naomi muttered. They always did. But what hit hardest wasn't the new evidence. It was the pain tucked into every message. I had a miscarriage in the bathroom. No break. They told me to clock out if I needed to cry. My brother died. They told me bereavement wasn't covered for siblings. They cut my hours after I reported my supervisor for harassment. Every message chipped away at the version of the company I had once believed in. Not that I hadn't seen the cracks before. But this was rot. Systemic, infectious, deliberate. The day the OSHA officers arrived at Evercore, I was parked 2 blocks away. Ashley had tipped me off. They're walking in right now. 2 guys, jackets and briefcases. Darren would have wet himself. I couldn't help but laugh. Then I stared at the old building through my windshield. Beige concrete, no windows. The same one I had walked into for 16 years, without ever realizing how badly it needed to crumble. Now, it was under siege from within. And I was finally on the outside. Free. Evercore's social media went dark. Their careers page vanished. The HR manager who had once ghosted Naomi's email suddenly deactivated her. LinkedIn. Then the real blow came. The Department of Labor issued an interim report. And it wasn't. Pretty violations, safety infractions, payroll inconsistencies. They used the word deliberate 5 times. My phone buzzed nonstop. News outlets wanted interviews. A podcast emailed me about a full episode feature. But I didn't want fame. I wanted change. And change, I knew, doesn't happen with headlines alone. Ashley invited me to her son's birthday party that weekend. I know it's silly, she texted, but you've kind of become family. I stared at those words for a long time. Family. Not the one you're born into, but the one you build, slowly, painfully, deliberately. I went. Balloons hung from a wooden fence. There were cheap folding chairs and pink lemonade in plastic cups. Ashley's boy ran around in a superhero cape. I watched him and thought, he'll never know that his mom helped take down a giant. But one day he'll see her strength in himself. Do you think they'll recover? Ashley asked me later, her voice low. Companies like Evercore? I shrugged. They always try, she looked down. They hired a crisis consultant. Word is they're planning a cultural reset, I snorted. With what culture left to reset? Ashley gave me a sad smile. That's why it matters, she said. That you kept speaking, even when it cost you everything. I didn't have a response. Not then. But I felt the truth of her words settle inside me, warm and still. Meanwhile, new voices joined ours. A woman named Priya reached out. She had worked at Evercore's Southern Division. Fired after exposing payroll fraud. Then Carlos. He was part of the night shift in Chicago. Injured on duty, paid under the table to stay quiet. Their stories mirrored ours, almost word for word. Different cities, same crimes. So we formed a coalition. The Echo Workers. Not a formal nonprofit, just a loose network. We met on Zoom, shared files, encouraged each other to speak, to file, to push. The louder we got, the more Evercore flinched. By the 3rd month, shareholder pressure mounted. The CEO was called to testify before a state labor board. I watched the hearing on a grainy live stream. He stuttered, sweated, blamed rogue managers, claimed ignorance. But the committee had our receipts. My receipts, documents signed by him, approvals made under his login, HR emails forwarded to his inbox. He couldn't run, couldn't spin, couldn't bury it. And when the chairwoman finally said, "Your organization is being referred to the Attorney General for further investigation," I exhaled. Not out of victory, but out of long-held breath finally released. And then, the lawsuits came, a class action from former employees, a federal whistleblower protection case, a civil suit from a vendor who had been stiffed on millions. Evercore's board panicked. They fired the CEO, quietly, without a statement. Darren, already gone, had gone underground. No new job postings, no appearances, just vanished. Lisa called me with the news. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said, looking out my window at the afternoon sun. "We did. But not all victories are clean." The article had gone viral. My name was out there, and with it came trolls, harassment, even threats. One message read, "Hope you're proud of yourself. People lost jobs because of you." And maybe they were right. Not everyone at Evercore was a villain. There were innocent people caught in the collapse. I hated that part, but I reminded myself, this wasn't my fire. I hadn't built the matchbox. I had just lit the final spark. And if something toxic burns down, Maybe that's the only way new life grows. One night, I got an email from a young woman named Tina. She had just quit her job at a shipping plant after reporting abuse from her supervisor. She wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to leave. I thought I was weak. Now I know I'm just done being used. Thank you." I read it again and again. And then I cried, because for all the noise, the pain, the risk, this is what it was for, to make even one person feel less alone. I still don't work full-time. The job market hasn't been kind. Some companies see me as a hero, others a risk, but that's okay. I've started freelancing, consulting for workplace equity groups, helping others learn how to document abuse, navigate HR, find their voice. It's not flashy, but it's honest. And when I go to sleep at night, I know my silence didn't protect the powerful. It empowered the voiceless, and that's a legacy I can live with. There's something eerie about watching a giant crumble. Not all at once, but slowly, with every exposed lie and silent confession bringing it closer to the ground. Evercore wasn't just a company anymore. It had become a symbol. And now, with its foundation cracked and crumbling, people were beginning to notice, and more importantly, speak. 3 weeks after the Department of Labor's report went public, Evercore's regional offices began seeing mass resignations. It started small: 2 dispatchers in Kansas, a procurement manager in Oregon, and an IT specialist in the Chicago branch. But it was the emails they left behind that truly rocked the system. Each resignation came with a personal letter, not the standard "thanks for the opportunity" type, but detailed confessions. They described wage theft, unfiled injury reports, racial and gender discrimination, and the manipulation of vendor contracts. Some even included attachments: time card screenshots, Slack messages, falsified training logs. It was a digital flood. I read every one that reached me. Some made me nauseous. Others made me cry. A few made me so furious I had to get up and walk around the block just to cool down. But they all had one thing in common: courage. One name popped up repeatedly: Jared Sellers, the West Coast Regional Director. He had been promoted from within the original warehouse division years ago. A man known for quiet efficiency and cost-cutting brilliance. Translation: he was good at screwing people over without leaving fingerprints. Until now. One brave woman, Danielle, a senior analyst from the Los Angeles office, sent me a full PDF of internal communications. Jared had instructed her to clean up discrepancies in health benefit audits, basically to erase records that proved certain employees were eligible but had never received coverage. Some of those employees had families. One even had a child undergoing chemotherapy. Danielle couldn't take it anymore, so she quit. Then she shared everything with me and with the authorities. "This isn't about revenge," she wrote in her email to me. "It's about reckoning." Her words stuck with me. They felt like a mirror to my own fire. Naomi and I had grown closer through all this. It was strange, how tragedy and betrayal could make new friendships feel decades old. She'd become my anchor, my soundboard, and I'd become hers. We met one evening at a bookstore cafe halfway between our homes. She showed up in a blazer, hair slicked back, exuding a quiet power she didn't have months ago. "They're bleeding," she said, skipping hello. "You saw the Oregon numbers?" I nodded. Evercore's Q2 internal performance deck had leaked. Warehouse productivity was down 38%. Cost of legal compliance was up 220%. "They're trying to fix it with PR," I said. "Not even fixing the system." "Just appearances," Naomi smirked. "That's always been their way. But this time, it's not working," and she was right. It wasn't public sentiment was shifting. A mid-sized news outlet in Ohio published a deep dive on labor abuse in mid-tier logistics companies, using Evercore as a case study. Their headline: "Empire of Efficiency, House of Harm." It caught fire. National outlets picked it up. The story trended on social media. Hashtags like "On Our Echo Workers" and "On Our Evercore Exposed" started gaining traction. More former employees came forward. Some on the record, some anonymously. Many started using my name as a rallying point, not because I was a hero, but because I was the first domino. And even then, I felt a strange mix of pride and guilt, because the damage wasn't abstract anymore. I received a message from someone named Ellie, an intern in the marketing department. She'd lost her position after the department was dissolved to cut costs. Her note was simple. I know they did this to themselves, but it still hurts. I just wanted to work somewhere that mattered. It gutted me. I knew I had to do something more than just watch. So I started compiling everything, every document, email, resignation letter, testimony, article, and organized it all into a living timeline. A digital archive, a reckoning journal. I partnered with an advocacy group focused on corporate whistleblowers. They helped me verify documents, redact names, and present the timeline publicly through a dedicated site, echoledger.org. We didn't make it flashy. No ads, no donation buttons, just raw truth. Within days, it had 200,000 visits. Within weeks, it was cited in 5 legal filings and 2 class action lawsuits. Evercore's lawyers issued a cease and desist. We ignored it. But while the empire cracked, it didn't fall. Not yet. They appointed a new interim CEO, Clara Wu, a polished woman with a background in crisis management and a track record of healing toxic cultures. Launched what she called the Reset Campaign, town halls, listening sessions, anonymous employee surveys, press releases full of buzzwords like transparency, empowerment, and rebuilding trust. Some people lapped it up. Others saw through it, especially the ones who had already seen what lay beneath the paint. One night, I got a call from Lisa. I have something, she said, voice low. Lisa had always been cautious, but this time she was urgent. She'd been contacted by an internal compliance officer at Evercore, someone still working inside. A woman named Brenda. She says Clara's just a face, Lisa explained. The board is planning to quietly spin off divisions and liquidate assets. They're planning to dissolve Evercore over the next year. I sat up straight. Dissolve it? Completely? Lisa hesitated. Yes, but not publicly. They want to merge departments, shift debts, rebrand, and disappear before lawsuits catch up. My mind raced. This wasn't just saving themselves. It was escaping justice. I couldn't let that happen. I reached out to Priya, Carlos, Danielle, and a few others. We had our own little group now, people from every corner of the company, all with pieces of the puzzle. We began cross-referencing everything. Dates, memos, legal maneuvers. We uncovered paper trails leading to shell corporations, purchase orders rerouted through new entities, subsidiaries being renamed and merged in states with weak disclosure laws. It was a corporate disappearing act, a sleight of hand, but we caught it. We documented it, and we shared it. Echo Ledger published a new expose, The Vanishing Empire, How Evercore Plans to Escape Accountability. It exploded. The Department of Justice took notice. 2 weeks later, subpoenas were issued. Clara Wu was called to testify. So were 3 board members. The SEC opened a formal investigation into Evercore's restructuring. And just like that, what was once a whisper turned into a nationwide roar. I stood in my living room the night the story hit primetime news. The anchor's voice echoed through the room. An explosive investigation into corporate abuse, retaliation, and cover-ups has led to multiple federal inquiries against logistics giant Evercore Industries. I turned down the volume and stared at the screen. Not with satisfaction, not with revenge, but with clarity. They had tried to bury us. But they didn't realize we were seeds. The day Evercore's stock froze was the day it all became real. I remember staring at the Bloomberg ticker on my phone, blinking at the bright red line that refused to budge. Trading halted, pending material disclosure. The market had caught wind of the rot, and it was no longer just internal whispers and anonymous exposés. I sat at my kitchen table, hands trembling, coffee untouched. Across from me, Naomi was wide-eyed, her phone buzzing every few seconds with notifications from former colleagues, journalists, and even a few anonymous tipsters. "It's happening," she whispered. No fireworks, no applause. Just 2 exhausted women watching the empire that had almost destroyed them buckle under the weight of its own lies. By noon, the news was everywhere. SEC launches criminal investigation into Evercore Industries. DOJ expands probe into labor violations, financial misconduct, whistleblower archive, Echo Ledger, cited in federal case. It felt surreal. My name wasn't in the headlines, but I could feel the ripple. The story I had carried in my chest for over a year was no longer mine alone. It belonged to the world now. People were talking about Evercore like it was Enron. And for once, they weren't exaggerating. That afternoon, Lisa called me. Her voice was uncharacteristically quiet. They issued termination notices to over 600 employees today, effective immediately. No severance. My stomach dropped. Jesus. It's their last power move, gutting the company before the feds freeze the rest. I stood and paced the room. They're not even pretending to protect reputations now. Nope, she said. They're scrambling. They know it's over. Naomi and I took the train downtown that evening. A CNN team was interviewing ex-Evercore employees outside the company's shuttered corporate tower. Cameras, microphones, protest signs. It was pouring rain. Still, they stood, soaked, shivering, shouting for justice. I didn't join the cameras. I just watched. A woman in a faded blue warehouse uniform held up a cardboard sign. They stole my spine and called it a bonus. Beside her, a young man chanted, "No more ghosts in your spreadsheets." Another held a printed screenshot of his falsified injury report, signed by a supervisor who didn't exist. Naomi grabbed my hand. "This is bigger than us now," I nodded, unable to speak. A lump had lodged itself in my throat. The next week unfolded like a cinematic third act. The federal indictment was announced on a Tuesday morning. 10 executives charged, 3 board members, Jared Sellers, even Clara Woot wire fraud, falsification of records, labor violations. Conspiracy Clara was arrested at her Hamptons estate. Footage showed her being led away in yoga pants and designer sunglasses, barely looking up. A viral tweet read, "The Queen of Reset just got reset." I didn't laugh. I didn't feel joy, just relief. The kind of relief that's so deep it feels like grief. Evercore filed for bankruptcy on the same day. Chapter 11. Assets frozen. All public relations ceased. The website went dark, just a white screen with a single line of black text. "We are undergoing structural reorganization and cannot comment further." Translation: they were done. That night, I opened my laptop and wrote a letter. Not to Evercore, not to any news outlet, but to myself. "Dear Valerie, you were not crazy. You were not too emotional, or too sensitive, or too ambitious. They made you doubt the truth because the truth made them afraid. And now the truth has spoken. You did not win by destroying them. You won by refusing to be silent, and you are not done yet." I hit save and closed the laptop. The silence in my apartment felt sacred. Over the next few weeks, more dominoes fell. Former contractors filed lawsuits. Vendors exposed double billing schemes. Investors threatened litigation. Local unions began campaigning for better worker protections, using the Evercore playbook as a cautionary tale. It felt like the entire business world was holding its breath, watching to see what would come next. And then, something unexpected happened. A group of former employees, warehouse workers, accountants, analysts, and even a few mid-level managers, reached out to me. They wanted to start something new. Not another company. A cooperative. A logistics collective that would be employee-owned, transparency-led, and ethically operated. "We want you to be part of it," they told me. At first, I laughed. I'm a former operations lead turned whistleblower. I'm not exactly startup material, but they were serious. And the more I listened, the more it made sense. They didn't want my resume. They wanted my fire, my refusal to look away, my capacity to lead with empathy, not ego. We called it North Star Logistics Cooperative, small, scrappy, underfunded, but deeply aligned in purpose. Naomi handled HR infrastructure. Lisa oversaw tech. Danielle offered compliance insight. Even Carlos joined from his new job at a major nonprofit. We rented a co-working space, drafted a charter, created a flat pay equity structure. No bonuses for exploiting people. No secret memos. No golden parachutes. Just a new way to work. Together. 3 months later, North Star delivered its first shipment. From a community food bank to a storm relief center across the state. The driver? A former Evercore warehouse supervisor who used to be terrified of losing his job for taking a sick day. His eyes were wet when he dropped off the last box. "I haven't felt this human in years," he told us. I sat in the office that evening, looking at the framed copy of my old termination letter. I had kept it all this time. It read, "Your performance and attitude no longer align with Evercore's values of professionalism and efficiency." I smiled. They were right. I was never meant to fit inside a machine built to crush people. Now, I work with people who see one another, who listen, who build something better, not by copying the system that broke them, but by planting new roots in the ashes. And every so often I log onto Echo Ledger. Not to post anything, just to watch, to see new whistleblowers from other companies use the platform, to watch their stories unfold, to witness the ripple. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's patient. Sometimes it looks like healing. Evercore thought they could end me. But I became the crack that brought down their empire. And in its place, we built something that can't be bought, rigged, or silenced. We built the truth. The morning I finally slept in without waking to anxiety, I knew something had changed. No 4 a.m. alarms triggered by phantom Slack notifications. No stomach-churning dread over unread emails. Just quiet sunlight streaming in, warm and ordinary, like I hadn't known in years. Naomi was already up, sipping tea at the kitchen counter with her laptop open. She glanced over, smiling softly. "You look like someone who finally exorcised their demons." I stretched, grinning. "I think I buried them. Deep." She raised her mug. "To fresh graves." We both laughed. But beneath it was a quiet truth. We were no longer living in reaction to pain. We were beginning to live beyond it. The weeks after Evercore's collapse passed like the aftershocks of a long, bitter war. People were rebuilding. Some employees found new work, often with better boundaries, stronger ethics, and thanks to whistleblower protections, a bit of courage they hadn't known they possessed. Others, like Jared and Clara, remained under investigation, their bail hearings televised like minor celebrity trials. A documentary crew from Netflix even contacted Naomi for interviews, but she declined. "I don't want to be the face of pain," she told me. "I want to be the architect of what comes next." That resonated with me more than anything. North Star Logistics was still small, but it was growing, organically, steadily. Every week, more people applied not just for jobs, but for purpose. I held one-on-one onboarding calls with new hires. Warehouse staff, drivers, office assistants, people whose resumes screamed discarded in the traditional market. But here they glowed. "I'm not here to be rich," one told me. "I'm here to be respected." That became our unofficial motto. Not here to be rich, here to be respected. I started therapy again. Not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to understand how I held myself together. Dr. Klein. My therapist was a quiet, observant woman who asked few but piercing questions. "Do you still feel anger?" she asked once, during a rainstorm tapping the windows. "Yes," I said, "but it no longer owns me. I rent it sometimes when I need to build something strong, but I don't sleep with it anymore," she smiled. "Then you're healing." One day, Naomi and I took a drive past the old Evercore campus. The building stood empty now, windows boarded, chain-link fences surrounding the lot. The Evercore logo had been removed from the glass tower, but the shadow of it still lingered, faint, like a ghostly bruise on the facade. Naomi pulled over. "Want to go yell at it for closure?" I shook my head. "No, it's already quieter than we ever were." We sat in silence for a while, then turned the car around and drove toward the city. 6 months after the collapse, I received a package. No return address. Just my name, handwritten on a brown envelope. Inside was a copy of Evercore's final annual report, the one they never got to file. Pages of projected growth, false metrics, glowing forecasts, and on the last page, scrawled in pen, "You were right." I was too much of a coward to say it then, but you were always right. J. Jared? I turned the page over. Nothing else. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just placed the paper gently into my filing cabinet, under a folder labeled Closure. I began writing again. Not reports, not whistleblower memos, but essays, letters, stories. Stories about women who broke cycles. Who chose truth even when it burned. Who walked away from palaces of pain and built cabins of peace. Some I posted anonymously. Some I signed. They started circulating, on blogs, forums, even a few newsletters dedicated to workplace reform. I began receiving messages from women around the world. I thought I was the only one. You gave me words for a wound I never named. I left my toxic job last week. I'm terrified and free. Every message reminded me of something. This story never belonged only to me. At a North Star board meeting, Carlos, yes, our dear compliance guy, stood up and proposed a new initiative. We should launch a mentorship program, he said, for women re-entering the workforce after corporate trauma. There was silence in the room, not because it was controversial, but because it was overdue. Naomi nodded slowly. We'll call it the Afterlight. And just like that, a new pillar of our cooperative was born. I mentored a woman named Suri Early, 30s, brilliant, former data analyst who had resigned from her company after a sexual harassment. Claim was ignored and then turned against her. She reminded me of myself. In that first month post-firing, wounded but fiery, scared but sharp, during one of our sessions, she asked, "How do you ever trust people again?" I paused, then said, "You start by trusting that not everyone is them. Then, you trust yourself not to tolerate them again." She nodded. "That's hard." "Yes," I said. "But you already started." One evening, I was invited to speak at a university business ethics panel. Strange, right? Me, a woman blacklisted by one of the biggest corporations in the state. I almost didn't go. But Naomi insisted. Be the voice you needed when you were 22. So I went. I stood before a lecture hall of young faces, all hungry for success, but wary of the cost. I didn't read from a script. I just told them my story. How ambition without empathy becomes exploitation. How silence can feel safe but rot your soul. How revenge isn't destruction. It's reconstruction. At the end of my talk, a student raised his hand. "What's the one thing you wish you knew before all this happened?" I looked at him for a long moment, then answered, "That your value doesn't disappear just because someone refuses to see it." He wrote that down, and I wrote it in my heart. Later that night, I walked alone through the city. Past neon signs, closed cafes, mothers pushing strollers home late, the air smelled like possibility. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what was next. I was just here, not haunted, not hunted, not hiding, just living. Back home, I opened a new document on my laptop. Blank, untitled. I didn't know what I was going to write. But I knew this. I wasn't writing to be heard. I was writing because I finally had nothing to prove. Healing doesn't always arrive like a sunrise. Sometimes it tiptoes in like dusk, soft, slow, barely noticeable until one day you realize you're not in the dark anymore. There's a moment after every storm when the silence feels almost holy. It doesn't arrive with trumpets. It slips in unnoticed, like a hush across a battlefield, long after the war is over. For me, that moment came on a Sunday morning, months after Evercore's collapse, while sitting alone on a park bench, sipping cheap coffee from a paper cup. No headlines, no alerts, just the sound of kids playing somewhere in the distance and the wind gently moving through trees like it had something to say. And for the first time, I listened. I wasn't thinking about vengeance, or justice, or how far I'd come. I was thinking about who I used to be, that woman who used to keep her phone by her pillow, afraid of missing a crisis. The one who apologized before speaking in meetings, who stayed late, said yes to abuse, and smiled through being invisible. I don't hate her anymore. She did what she had to survive. She loved her work, and she wanted to matter. She was good, and they used that goodness like a battery until it was drained. But she's not here anymore. I'm not her anymore. I started writing a personal manifesto. Not the kind you post online, but the kind you whisper to yourself before bed. It had only 5 lines. I'm not here to prove my worth. I am not responsible for other people's comfort. I will not shrink to fit in. I will not trade silence for peace. I will choose myself, every time. That same week, North Star held its first company-wide retreat. No keynote speeches, no sycophantic panels, just people sitting in circles, sharing stories of where they came from and why they stayed. One woman, Maritza, a forklift operator, stood up and said something that lodged itself in my heart. I used to think loyalty meant staying through abuse, but now I think loyalty means refusing to let others rot you. That line hit like a thunderclap, because I realized I had confused endurance with strength. But real strength wasn't staying through the fire. It was walking out with your soul intact. Naomi and I were closer than ever. We didn't talk about Evercore much anymore, not out of avoidance, but because we no longer needed it to define us. Our new conversations were about building programs for single mothers, refugee training partnerships, mental health support pipelines, things that made ripples in the real world beyond boardrooms. She said once, "We were taught to play the game, but what if we're meant to change the rules entirely?" And that's what we did. Quietly, deliberately, without fanfare. Then, one day, a letter arrived in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Clara. I sat with it for a while. Didn't open it right away. I wasn't sure I needed to, but I did. Inside was a single sheet, folded neatly. Valerie, you may not believe me, and I wouldn't blame you, but I wanted to say that I remember everything. Not the sanitized version. The real one. I remember the look in your eyes that day at the exit interview. You were right. I was afraid. Afraid of being seen as weak. Afraid of losing what I thought was power. But I lost something more valuable than my job. I lost my integrity. I hope you find peace. I'm trying to earn mine. Clara, no apology. Just accountability, and honestly, that meant more. Because regret is common. But truth, unvarnished, uninvited, is rare. That night, I walked into the room where I'd kept all my Evercore files. The reports, the court documents, the letters. I took the whole stack, sat cross-legged on the floor, and read through each page like a mourner at a wake. Then I put them in a box, sealed it shut, and labeled it proof, not purpose. And I tucked it away in the back of my closet. Because I never wanted revenge to be the last chapter. I wanted it to be the turning point. At our next board meeting, we made a unanimous decision. North Star would launch a new fund, dedicated to helping employees navigate and exit toxic workplaces. Confidential support, legal aid, resume coaching, mental health services. We called it the Unbroken Fund. Carlos said, "We can't save everyone, but we can be the lighthouse." And I knew, in that moment, we were becoming what we needed back then. Months passed. The world moved on. Evercore became a cautionary tale in textbooks. Our story got picked up by international media. I was invited to speak at conferences I once wasn't allowed to attend, but I said no more often than yes, because the work, the real work, was here. Not on stages, not in headlines, but in quiet rooms, with people rebuilding their lives. One afternoon, I got a message from Suri, the woman I mentored. Got a job offer from a startup, remote, ethical, female-founded. I said yes. I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt. Then she added, "I used your manifesto as my screensaver. Line 5 hits the hardest. I will choose myself. Every time. Yes, Suri, yes you will." Later that week, I visited my parents. We hadn't spoken much in the aftermath. Not out of resentment, just distance, emotional, not geographical. I found my mom in the garden, trimming roses. She looked up. "You look lighter." "I am." She nodded as if that answered everything. And maybe it did. We didn't need to talk about betrayals anymore. Some wounds don't close because someone says sorry. They close because you stop bleeding for people who never brought you bandages. That night, I sat by my window, watching the city breathe. And I asked myself the question I wish someone had asked me years ago. If no one ever clapped, would you still sing? And the answer finally was yes, because I no longer needed applause. I just needed peace. That's the final lesson. Justice is powerful, but peace is personal. And sometimes the loudest triumph is choosing not to fight anymore. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who could stand still. Stillness used to terrify me. It felt like weakness, a pause between punches, a silence waiting to be shattered. But now it feels like breath. It feels like being. Months after everything, the trial, the collapse, the healing, I stopped checking headlines. My phone went quiet and I let it. The world could spin without my vigilance. For once, I wasn't its anchor. I was just here. And that was enough. North Star grew, but slowly, intentionally. No viral campaigns, no rush to scale, just people showing up for each other. We hired our 100th employee last month. Her name is Mina. She used to be a customer service rep at a bank that nearly crushed her spirit. On her first day, she cried during orientation. "I didn't know companies like this existed," she said. I smiled, because I knew exactly what she meant. I hadn't known either. So I built one. Every Friday, we held a candlelight circle. It started as a small ritual between Naomi and me. Light a candle for every injustice we survived that week, then blow them out as a reminder. It didn't define us. Soon, others joined. Last Friday, there were 43 candles, some lit for microaggressions, some for gaslighting bosses, some for family members who called them ungrateful for setting boundaries, some for being believed, some for the first time someone said, "You were right to walk away." And as the room glowed with soft firelight, I realized something. We had become more than a company. We were a sanctuary. One afternoon, I got a call from a familiar number, Samantha, the HR director from Evercore. I let it go to voicemail. She left a short message. "Hi, Valerie. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I just wanted to say I'm not at Evercore anymore. I've started a nonprofit. We help women leave hostile workplaces. I learned the hard way, but I learned. Thank you. I didn't call her back. I didn't need to. Because growth doesn't always require reconciliation. Sometimes, it's enough to know the ripple reached them." I started volunteering with girls from underserved communities, not as a savior, just as a mirror. I'd sit with them and ask, "What would you do if no one told you you were too much?" They'd look at me, wide-eyed, unsure. One girl, Amara, 13 years old and fierce as thunder, said, "I'd start my own studio. All-girl editors, all-girl camera crew, all stories about real stuff." I told her to start now, write the stories, use her phone, build badly if she had to, but build, because no one taught us that growing up. We were told to behave, to survive, to shrink. Not anymore. I started writing again. Not reports, not strategy decks, just writing, poems, essays, letters I never sent. One night, I wrote a letter to myself, the girl I used to be, the one sobbing in the Evercore bathroom, mascara running, wondering if her life was already over. "Dear Valerie, you were never too sensitive. You were never weak. You saw the rot before anyone else did. You felt it in your bones and they called you dramatic, but you were a prophet, and prophets don't always get applause. You didn't imagine the pain. You just refused to normalize it. I'm proud of you." Future UI printed it and taped it to my mirror, so I'd remember who saved me. Me. Naomi and I finally took that trip we always talked about. Iceland. No emails. No phones. Just waterfalls, open skies, and that strange geothermal silence that makes your soul hum. We stood at the edge of a cliff, hair whipping in the wind, and she said, "Can you believe this all started with an exit interview?" I laughed. Honestly, yeah, I can. Because sometimes the thing that breaks you is the same thing that sets you free. When we got back, I spoke at a local college, not a TED Talk, just a classroom full of tired seniors trying to imagine life beyond resumes. I told them my story. Not the polished version, the real one. And I ended with this: don't wait for permission to leave what kills your spirit. Don't confuse comfort with safety, and never, ever, stay small to make others feel big. The room was silent. Then someone clapped, and then everyone did. But this time the applause didn't fill a void. It echoed something that was already whole inside me. I visited the Evercore building one last time. It had a new name now, some bland tech startup. I stood across the street, watching the glass windows glint in the sun. No anger, no longing, just release. That chapter was over. But my story wasn't. Sometimes people ask me if I'd do it all again, if I'd blow the whistle, risk everything, burn bridges, fight the giant, and I say yes, without hesitation, because losing them was how I found myself, and I wouldn't trade her for anything. You see, the real revenge was never their destruction. It was my resurrection. It was waking up every day in a life I built, with truth, with people I love, with dignity. It was proving, not to them, but to myself, that I am not disposable, that I am not a footnote, that I am enough. And if you're watching this, wondering if you're crazy, wondering if you imagined the cruelty, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again, let me tell you, you're not crazy. You didn't imagine it. And yes, you will heal. You already are. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Thank you for listening. And remember that sometimes the family we create is more nurturing than the one we were born into.